I'm just going to quickly go through the review sheet for the next Algebra 2 test. So this first question just says write the expression as a complex number in standard form, which just means you're going to combine like terms, or later on you're going to FOIL. You know you're going to combine like terms if you have addition or subtraction here. So for the first one, we're just combining like terms. So let's line up the similar terms here. And then just add down. So we get 5 plus 3i, because remember this is like a 1i. Okay, so that's our answer for number 1. And then the one tricky thing about number 2 is that you need to distribute. So let's rewrite this under this part. So we have -3 minus I. So that's a tricky part, that you need to distribute this negative to this I. So then we just combine and add these together. So 6 minus 3 is 3. Negative I plus negative I is -2i. Okay, and let's go on to number 3. We'll just clear this up. So now you'll notice that we don't, now you'll notice that we don't have addition or subtraction. We have multiplication happening between these two pieces of information. So we want to FOIL. Okay, so starting with number 3, we're going to FOIL. So first gives us 8. Outer gives us -12i. Inner will give us -4i. And then I'm just going to erase to make it easier to see what's going on here. So lastly, this is where people mess up. We're going to multiply -2i times -3i. So negative times negative is positive. 2 times 3 is 6. I times I is I squared. So let's think a minute about what I means. I means square root of -1. So if we square this, if we have I squared, squaring a square root magically gets rid of the square root. So I squared is just -1. So we have to plug that in here. When we do that, we'll get 6 times -1, which is -6. Okay, so let's just rewrite what we have. Okay, I'm just going to give us a little bit more room here. So then let's combine the piece of information that have I with them to give us -16i. And we also have to combine -6 and 8 to give us 2. So that's our answer for number 3. All right, moving on to number 4. And I'll just erase what we have here. So once again, we have multiplication happening. So we need to FOIL. So -3 times 3 gives us -9 first. -3 times -I, negative times negative gives us positive 3i. Inner 4i times 3 gives us 12i. And lastly, 4i times -I gives us 4i squared. Oops, -4i squared. Because positive times negative. Okay, so once again, I squared just becomes -1. So here we have -4 times -1. which will give us positive 4. So let's combine that positive 4 with the only other number that we have all on its own. So this gives us negative 5, and then we combine 3i and 12i to give us 15i. Okay, let's move on to number 5. So number 5 is tricky, somewhat. You have a good opportunity to do some extra practice with these kinds of concepts. If you want, let me tell you the page numbers with the similar kinds of problems, so you could get some extra practice if you'd like. Okay. So let's make room for this. Okay, so if you want to do more practice problems like this, you can look at page 278, numbers 13 and 14. So if after this explanation you don't feel super confident about your ability to do this kind of problem, you could get some further practice with those problems. And I'll write the answers to those problems here so you'll know if you're right. Okay. And for 14, you're going to get this. Okay. This strikes me as odd, so I'm going to just double check that and let you know in the comments section if that in fact is the right answer. I know for sure this is the right answer. Okay, so let's try number 5. Okay, so whenever you see I in the denominator, you need to get it out of the denominator since you can't have a square root in the denominator. So the way you're going to do that is by multiplying times essentially the same thing, except you're going to change the charge of this. And whenever we're trying to get a square root out of the denominator, we're essentially just multiplying times, oops, sorry, it's wrong. We're essentially just multiplying times 1 by reproducing the same information on the top of a fraction and in the bottom of a fraction. Okay, so then we just multiply across. So for this top part, it means distributing. So we get 6 minus 2i. On the bottom, it means foiling. So I'm just going to make some room for foiling. Okay. So first we get 9. Outer we get negative 3i. Inner we get 3i plus 3i. And this is what you always want to achieve. You want to have these middle terms cancel. And lastly, we get minus I squared. So remember, I squared is square root of negative 1 squared, which is just negative 1. So then we have 9 minus negative 1, which is the same as 9 plus 1, which gives us 10. So we'll have 10 in our denominator. Now there's one last thing you need to do to make this answer perfect. Since each of these terms is a multiple of 2, you can divide everything by 2. So then we get 3 over 10 minus I over 10. Oops, I'm sorry. I didn't divide the bottom by 2. So 3 over 5 minus I over 5. Sorry about that. Okay, so that's just reducing because they have a common factor. Okay, so I'm just going to stop and upload this, and then I'm